Hello, hope you're doing well today. Today we are continuing our conversation over sports sociology. Today we're going to explore how societal structures and cultural norms influence sports, and in turn, how sports impact our society. Here we go. So let's talk about a pivotal moment in United States education and sport. Historically, sports were a male-dominated arena. However, thanks to landmark legislation like Title IX, we've seen a dramatic increase in opportunities for female athletes. Now, Title IX of the Educational Amendments Act of 1972 is a federal law that prohibits discrimination based on sex in any educational program or activity that receives federal funding. It opened the door for equal opportunities in academics as well as athletics, especially for women and girls. But with change often comes resistance. Title IX wasn't implemented without challenges. New laws face growing pains, and people in power, especially those invested in maintaining the old ways, sometimes use their influence over budgets and policy decisions to slow or block the growth of women's programs. Despite that, Title IX continues to be a cornerstone for gender equity in education and in sport. It reminds us that progress takes persistence and the fight for fairness isn't over. It has fundamentally changed the landscape of sports and making it a more inclusive space for everyone. Now let's look at how institutions comply with Title IX, specifically in athletics. The law uses something called the effective accommodation test, which has 3 prongs. The first of those prongs is proportionality. And so they look at participation opportunities for male and female students, and are they proportionate to their enrollment? Texas A&M Corpus Christi has around 11,350 students registered, and our breakdown is typically at 60% female to 40% male. And so are there opportunities that are proportionate to that breakdown in our athletics? The second prong looks at the history and continued practice. So has the school shown a pattern of expanding programs for the underrepresented sex? And also looks at the accommodation of interests and abilities. So is the institution meeting the interests and abilities of the underrepresented sex? And really, schools only need to satisfy one of these 3 to be considered in compliance. Now, the impact of Title IX has been significant. And since its passage, we've seen a major increase in participation in both interscholastic, which is high school, and intercollegiate sports, especially among girls and women. This growth has helped shift the culture around gender and athletics and opening doors and raising expectations for what equity in sports should look like. So what we're seeing now are more professional sports that it's becoming for the WNBA, and so it's opening doors in that arena. So what were the driving forces behind this major expansion of opportunities for women in sports? There are several key factors that work together to create this change. The first of those is legislation. As we've mentioned, the landmark legislation was a critical catalyst. Laws like Title IX provided the legal framework necessary to mandate and enforce equal opportunities in schools and universities. The women's movement. The broader women's movement was also essential. This powerful social movement challenged traditional gender roles and advocated for women's access to all sectors of society, including the world of sports. And then the fitness movement. This was alongside the legislation and the women's movement, we had the health and fitness movement. And so as physical fitness has become more mainstream and a valued part of life for everyone, it helped to break down barriers and encourage women to be athletic and active. And the increased visibility of female athletes. And really with this, it created a cycle of inspiration. The more that women and girls saw successful female athletes in the media, the more they were inspired to participate, which in turn grew the audience and visibility for women's sports. While Title IX marked a significant step toward gender equity in sports, several factors still limit women's full participation in athletics today. One of those is financial constraints. While many athletic programs, particularly at the high school and collegiate level, prioritize men's sports when allocating resources, and limited funding affects access to quality coaching and equipment, travel, and facilities for women's teams. There's also incomplete compliance with Title IX, so some institutions fall short in meeting all three prongs of Title IX's effective accommodation test. This results in fewer opportunities and uneven support for female athletes, and even despite the legal obligations. And then there's the lack of women coaches and administrators. The decline in women coaching women's teams reduces mentorship opportunities and representation in leadership. This imbalance can affect recruitment, athlete confidence, and program direction. And minimization of women's accomplishments. So media coverage of women's sports remains disproportionately low. Female athletes often receive less recognition, which can impact public perception and sponsorship opportunities and young girls' motivation to participate. And then you've got cultural stereotypes and biases. The persistent gender norms and outdated beliefs about women's physical abilities or roles in society continue to influence decisions at all levels of sport, from team formation to leadership hiring. Together, these factors remind us that while progress has been made, the fight for equity in sport is ongoing. And true inclusivity requires continued effort, education, and commitment from institutions, communities, and individuals. While Title IX dramatically increased opportunities for female athletes, an unexpected outcome was the decline in female coaches. In 1970, women held 90% of coaching positions for female intercollegiate teams. By 2014, that number had dropped to 43%. As women's sports gained funding, visibility, and status, more men entered the field, often securing the higher paying roles. And this shift raises questions about gender equity and leadership, and not just participation. While the underrepresentation of women in coaching and leadership roles is due to several complex and interconnected factors, one of those is the limited pipeline of well-qualified women due to fewer opportunities and support, and the lack of visibility. Young women rarely see female coaches or administrators as role models, and the traditional stereotypes that label coaching as a male-dominated field or question women's leadership abilities. And then there's also the institutional resistance, where those in power may be hesitant or to share or shift access to influential positions. These challenges highlight the need for mentorship, policy change, and active efforts to promote gender equity in sport leadership. If we look at minorities in sport, we can ask the question, is sport colorblind? Despite the ideal that sports is a merit-based arena where skill and talent matter most, racism and prejudice still exist within sports. While many believe that sport transcends race, evidence shows that there are still racial biases, stereotypes, and systemic barriers that persist at all levels of sport. A major milestone in breaking racial barriers was in 1946 when Jackie Robinson became the first African American to play Major League Baseball for the Brooklyn Dodgers. His entry marked the beginning of integration in professional sport, challenging segregation and discrimination in athletics. Despite integration, many minority groups remain underrepresented in certain sports, such as swimming, golf, and tennis, and in sport administration and leadership roles. This underrepresentation reflects broader social inequities, including access to resources, opportunities, and historical exclusion. Race ideology refers to the web of ideas and beliefs that people use to give meaning to skin color. These beliefs influence how individuals are evaluated and how social structures are organized based on racial classifications. Essentially, it shapes how society interprets race and assigns value or status to people and groups. And then stacking is the phenomenon where players from certain racial or ethnic groups are disproportionately placed in specific positions on sports teams. For example, Black athletes are often overrepresented in positions emphasizing speed and athleticism, like wide receivers in football, while white athletes may be overrepresented in positions thought to require leadership or strategic thinking, like quarterback. Is stacking a reflection of stereotypical beliefs? Yes. Stacking often reflects and reinforces racial and ethnic stereotypes. Coaches, scouts, and decision makers make consciously or unconsciously assign athletes to positions based on assumptions about their physical and mental abilities tied to race rather than on individual skill or potential. Several factors limit participation in sports for various groups, especially minorities and marginalized communities. Poverty is one of those. The lack of financial resources can restrict access to sport programs, equipment, training, and travel for competitions. Poor health. Chronic health issues or inadequate health care can prevent consistent involvement in physical activities. And the lack of equipment. Sports often require specific gear which may be unaffordable or unavailable in some communities. And then the concern for loss of cultural identity. Some groups may resist participation in mainstream sports due to fears that it could erode their cultural traditions and identity. So if we look at sport for children and youth, what we've seen is that the participation in youth sports has increased dramatically over recent decades. And not just participation, but the amount of money spent on youth sports as well, and youth travel, sports travel or tourism. It has increased dramatically over recent decades, becoming a significant part of many children's lives. Now, there are benefits associated with that. There's numerous benefits, including physical fitness and social skills, the teamwork, the discipline, and an improved self-esteem. There are some concerns on the other side. Despite the benefits, there is widespread concern about the nature and outcomes of youth sports programming. First of those is the overemphasis on winning. It's one of the greatest criticisms, and it's at the expense of enjoyment and personal development and long-term participation. The focus can lead to pressure and burnout and negative experiences for young athletes. Now, the National Alliance for Youth Sports, or NAYS, is an organization that's dedicated to promoting positive youth sports experiences by providing education, training, and resources to parents, coaches, and administrators. There are other organizations out there as well. Leadership is critical in shaping the experiences and outcomes of youth sports. Good leadership can foster positive development, while poor leadership can foster the negative experiences like burnout, pressure, or dropout. To promote long-term participation and positive outcomes, youth sports programs should be designed to include elements that children find enjoyable, such as playfulness and creativity, fair competition and social interaction, and opportunities for skill development at a pace that's appropriate to the child's age and abilities, and flexibility to allow children to explore different sports and roles without excessive pressure. Many youth sports rely heavily on volunteers, coaches, referees, and organizers. So proper training of volunteers is essential to ensure they understand child development principles, positive coaching techniques, safety and inclusion practices, and effective communication with children and parents. The developmental model focuses on fostering personal growth, enjoyment, skill, and socialization. It prioritizes fun and learning over competition. The professional model emphasizes competition, performance, and winning, often resembling adult or elite sport environments. For youth sports, emphasizing the developmental model is generally more beneficial for children's overall well-being and long-term engagement and physical activity. Something else that we see in sport is violence, and oftentimes this is due to an overextension of physical and psychological intimidation. Some athletes and teams use excessive physical force or psychological tactics to intimidate their opponents, which can harm sportsmanship and safety. And then you've got bench clearing brawls, these large fights that involve most or all players from both teams, often triggered by on-field altercations and escalating conflicts and poor emotional control. And then you have the use of enforcers. So certain teams employ players known as enforcers whose role is to intimidate opponents, often through aggressive or violent behavior, especially in contact sports like hockey. And the media coverage sometimes sensationalizes or glamorizes violent incidents in sports, which can normalize aggression and encourage imitation. And then the popularity and visibility of professional athletes cause younger or amateur players to mimic violent behaviors seen at the top level, perpetuating a cycle of aggression. And violence is not limited to players. Oftentimes, spectators and parents sometimes exhibit aggressive or violent behavior at games, creating unsafe environments and negatively affecting the sports culture. Some level of physical contact and aggression is inherent and accepted in many sports, such as football, hockey, rugby. Violence crosses the line when it causes intentional harm. It goes beyond the rules or threatens players' safety. There are some key indicators of too much violence, and with that, intent to injure rather than compete. The repeated dangerous actions despite warnings or penalties, as well as the escalation to fighting or actions that disrupt fair play. Harm to physical or psychological well-being of players. Drawing the line involves balancing the sport's nature with a commitment to safety, respect, and fair competition. Another thing we see are the performance-enhancing substances, and oftentimes this is a quest for excellence. It's about the pressure to perform. There are high expectations from coaches, sponsors, fans, and even the athletes themselves push themselves to seek any advantage. There is a desire to win and succeed. Winning can bring fame and financial rewards as well as career advancement. And then the physical demands of the sport. So to recover faster from intense training and competition, or to improve strength, speed, and endurance, we take these substances. There's also the over-conforming to sports higher power and performance ethics. So athletes may feel compelled to conform to the culture of extreme dedication where winning at all costs is something that's valued. Is drug use a result of over-conforming to sports higher power and performance ethic? Yes. Drug use is often linked to over-conformity when athletes internalize sports norms to an extreme degree, prioritizing winning and performance over their health and the ethics or rules of the game. This intense pressure can overshadow considerations of fairness and personal well-being. Really, the way to control this is to inform athletes, coaches, and support staff about risks and ethics and the consequences of drug use, and with strict testing and enforcement. So regular random drug testing with meaningful penalties helps to deter usage. You also need support systems that provide psychological and physical support to manage pressure without resorting to drugs. And then a culture change, promoting values that emphasize fair play, health, and integrity over winning at all costs. And then intentional cooperation, so collaboration among all the sport organizations worldwide to maintain consistent rules and testing standards. So to add on to our conversation earlier, since Title IX in 1972, sporting opportunities for girls and women have significantly increased across all levels, from youth sports to collegiate and professional athletes. Despite this progress, women remain underrepresented in leadership and key professional roles within sports, including head coach, athletic trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, and administrative positions such as athletic directors. Increasing women's representation in these roles is essential for promoting gender equity and providing role models for future generations. We also have to look at pay equity. Women in sports, whether as athletes, coaches, or administrators, should receive equal pay and compensation equivalent to their male counterparts. Pay equity promotes fairness and acknowledges women's contributions and helps retain and attract talented women in sport professions. Athletes, regardless of gender, race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or background, have a duty, a powerful platform, and responsibility to take a stand for equality and justice for all individuals within and beyond sport. Sport is a tool for social change. When athletes speak out, they raise awareness. They challenge discrimination and promote inclusion, helping to create a more equitable sporting environment. And despite progress made by programs like the Paralympics, there has been a decline in sporting opportunities for individuals with disabilities over the past decade. It is critical to increase access and participation opportunities for people with disabilities at all sport levels, from grassroots to elite, to promote inclusion, health, and social integration. Ensuring accessible facilities, trained coaches, and supportive policies are key to reversing this decline. Some current trends to discuss are team mascots. They are expected to become more considerate and inclusive, and it's something that we've seen at Texas A&M Corpus Christi as well. Our team mascot is Izzy, and Izzy has undergone quite a few transitions and becoming more considerate and inclusive in how he or she appears. Reflecting that respect for all individuals as well as cultures. There is a growing movement to move away from mascots that misrepresent or perpetuate racism, especially those based on Native American imagery and other stereotypes. This shift supports cultural sensitivity and promotes positive social values in sport. Sport will continue to be a major global business, generating billions through athletes' salaries, which are projected to keep rising, ticket sales for games and events, and merchandise and clothing sales, especially for those successful teams. Now, there are some financial decisions for top collegiate athletes that they are coming up with. The top collegiate athletes are increasingly facing tough choices between accepting financial and gift offers, often under NCAA amateurism rules and restrictions, and pursuing opportunities to earn millions of dollars through professional contracts, endorsements, or the new NIL rights before completing their college. These decisions will shape the future of college sports, athlete careers, and business landscapes of athletics to come. Now, another current trend is one that's for athletes who specialize early in one sport and participate in travel teams. They have become more common even at the youth level. This trend contrasts with the traditional multi-sport athlete model, where young athletes played multiple sports to develop diverse skills. Early specialization is often driven by the pursuit of elite performance, exposure to recruiters, and opportunities for scholarships or professional careers. And with that, the impact of the performance enhancing substances and ethical issues on athlete recruitment and legacy are an issue as well. And so with this, just consideration of maintaining a sport ethic of fair play and integrity and respect as something that we have to increasingly be critical in evaluating athletes' careers as well as our legacies. So in summary, sport is not truly colorblind. There are racial stereotypes that affect positions and leadership roles still, even though integration has improved, but underrepresentation still remains. We also see that Participation is growing in youth sports, but there are concerns with an overemphasis on winning and highlighting the need for developmental and fun-focused models with trained leaders. There's also excessive intimidation and media glamorization that increases violence in sport. And we need to be promoting respect and consistent penalties to help reduce that. Other issues in the sports sociology, are performance enhancing drugs. Athletes using drugs due to pressure and overconforming to sports performance ethic. Education and strict testing are key controls to preventing that. And then gender equity. The women's opportunities in coaching and administration must increase, and with that, equity in pay. And then, of course, inclusion and advocacy for athletes. Providing opportunities for individuals with disabilities needs to expand, and cultural sensitivity across the board with our team mascots, and our sport still remains a major business with complex athlete financial decisions, but we just need to be cognizant of the cultural sensitivity with that. And then the specialization in ethics. Early sports specialization, it's going to continue to rise. We need to be mindful of ethical behavior and avoiding performance enhancing drug use for athlete recruitment as well as legacy. And that is all that I have for you today. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to talking with you again. Have a great day.